we will be proceeding to a question and answer period. We do have a roving microphone here, so if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Before we move to that, I will just take advantage of my role up here to ask the ambassador specifically a question. I guess coming off of Phoebe's remark that all politics is local, you have seen an increase in extreme violence in Iraq in the past 6 months. In May, according to the UN numbers, 1,045 people were killed by acts of violence and terrorism. In June, 761 people were killed. And in July so far, in the last 4 days, you've seen 126 people, according to AFP's numbers. And so at times it's, and I've spoken to Jane and Gareth about this in the past, it's difficult to, at times you feel somewhat disconnected when you're talking about Iraq's foreign policy, and yet domestically you have these kinds of issues in Baghdad and throughout Iraq. And so I guess my question to you is, a lot of this has been tinged with this sectarian discourse, and the violence has quite frankly been of a nature that is very easily categorized as that. To what extent do you see a relationship between Iraq's foreign relations, what many have called an increase in polarization, sectarian polarization across the region, and the domestic issues inside Iraq? And perhaps what you've spoken about, previously is this connection with an environment of fear inside Iraq. How do you see these in relation to Iraq's domestic and foreign position?
I probably would need an hour to answer.
You have about 3 minutes. So.
I think you brought up many complex issues in this. And first of all, when we talk about national interests, I think when we study other nations that have gone through what we have gone through, we see that those who emerge successful from those situations are the nations who provided the forward-looking, not the backward-looking. If you look to the future, if you favor the future, if you have confidence in what the future provides, the future of the nation, that will be the driver of bringing people together. But if you look at the past, if you keep looking at the legacy issues, then you tend to stay where you are, if not move forward. So I think that in terms of thinking about foreign policy, in terms of thinking about our national interests, I think it's an opportunity of bringing people together, of gathering momentum toward the future, of rebuilding the country. Because this is the case, this is the story of Iraq, where we convince all Iraqis, not only Shiites, Sunnis, Kurds, and Arabs, but even the smallest minority, even the individuals, that their best interest is in this entity that's called Iraq. And Iraq is for all Iraqis, regardless of their background. So that's the thing. The other thing that I can mention in this is that really it's this national sentiment that I think is extremely strong in Iraq. It's because of the atmosphere of fear, it doesn't shine. It doesn't come up. Any time and any time where people are in peace, they tend to align themselves with their national identity. Hopefully, when we move forward by improving performance of the government, by providing government abilities to provide security for the people, then the need to identification with the sects, with the tribe, with other things will diminish, and again, all Iraqis will be gathered together under their national identity with the celebration of the diversity that Iraq has. Iraq is when I know I'm talking in the presence of an expert on the history of Iraq. When you look at the civilizations in around the world, you see that one important characteristic of Iraq's civilization is that it's diversity. Iraq as a civilization is diverse. When you look at the Sumerian, the Babylonian, the Akkadian, the Assyrians, these are people of different backgrounds, different ethnicity. It's not the same people. The Sumerians are different from the Akkadians, from the Babylonians. So we have lived through this diversity for thousands of years. And I'm sure we can move forward by acknowledging and celebrating this diverse community.
Thank you. With that, I will open it up to questions. Maybe we have a bit of time, so maybe we'll take perhaps 2 or 3 at a time. So if you can, we'll start with this gentleman right here. Yes, here. Just right behind, sorry, right there. If you could stand and identify yourselves, that'd be great.
My name is Frank Domini. I'm a European telecommunications engineer. His Excellency preempted one part of my question. I noticed 3 things on a quick read through your report that seemed to be omitted. The first one was about water and an agreement between the countries of the Tigris and Euphrates basin, which is very important given the drought in the effect of the drought in the Jazeera. The second one is weapons of mass destruction. Iraq is the one country in the Middle East that we know hasn't got any. Could it be the core of the rollout of a Middle Eastern WMD-free zone? And the third one is military power. You talked about everybody worrying about the outcomes of Syria. If, God forbid, the bad guys win in Syria and start coming in the direction of Iraq, how are you going to stop a Syrian armored division crossing the frontier? Is there a possibility that Iraq could turn inwards for about 10 years and start and get a peaceful period to rebuild? I'm sorry I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'll just drop out.
Why don't we take that first, because there are, I think, 4 there. So I'll start with you, Ambassador, if you'd like to begin.
Start with that.
Yeah, in response to the report, happy to see people already reading it. These issues are referred to, but quite briefly. They're not key areas of focus, partly because we've found that the preoccupation with Syria, Iran, Turkey, Saudi, Qatar has diverted policymakers to some extent from focusing on water and energy issues, even though these are specific areas where you really could build more of a national consensus. And we heard frustration from some people that felt, Turkey, for instance, could benefit from the fact that Iraq was quite divided and preoccupied and not really standing up for its national interests in those areas. The WMD thing is also interesting. Iraq hosted some of the talks between Iran and the 3+3. It also made an offer to Libya after the regime change in Libya to help Libya dispose of its stockpiles of WMD. I read reports about that at the time. I don't know where it went after that, but it was quite an interesting signal to be sending.
We talk about Syria. Iraq has vital interests in Syria. The most important interest for Iraq in Syria is the peace, security, and stability of Syria. This is a vital interest. And I think we need to underscore this as many times as possible, because any meddling in the unity or the security of Syria will have diverse impact on Iraq. In addition, of course, you mentioned the second issue, which is water. We need to engage our neighbors, especially Syria, Turkey, and Iran, on using the water resources in the region in a cooperative way. And of course, Syria offers Iraq other important interests economics is, and trade one of them.
We'll take a question right here.
Hello, I'm Sam Nassif, member of the institute here. Do you think the election of President Hassan Rouhani in Iran could create some kind of detente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that in turn may have an effect on Iraq being able to formulate foreign policy in a more free way and possibly create more peace in the area as a whole, including in Iraq and Syria?
In my capacity as an Iraqi ambassador in Iraq, I have good relations with foreign ministry and my colleague, the Iranian ambassador, and we enjoy in-depth discussions. The government of Saudi Arabia has welcomed the election of President Rouhani, and they are eager to work with him. However, the Saudi-Iranian relations suffer a great deal from mistrust. They don't trust each other. And when they talk, they don't trust what they hear. And I think unless they break this cycle of mistrust and start talking about substantive issues, and that's what in our role to encourage both sides to sit down and talk about important issues, because any tension in the region, any ease of tension in the region is beneficial to the rest. What we want is we want our region to be a peaceful one. At least we want to be a positive force in terms of establishing stability and security, because that's a basic requirement for reconstruction.
I think the answer that I would give is that Rouhani's accession could improve relations, and you could have that scenario that very good scenario that you've painted there. But it's based upon a lot of assumptions. It's based upon an assumption that the position of the president of Iran actually has real authority to engage in those sorts of questions in that sort of way. It's based upon assumptions of IRGC leadership and what they're doing in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and what their positions are going forward. And I mean, there's a honeymoon period, and I guess that we're going to see hopefully some progress and some kind-worded diplomatic exchanges between Riyadh and Tehran going forward. But how far that goes, I'd be slightly skeptical myself. I hope I'm disappointed, though.
It will go as far as during the Khatami period, or there will be visits and things like this? Do you expect that to happen?
Well, there are discussions of visits potentially taking place. I don't know. I hope so, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
One more question.
Sorry, we have to move on, sorry. I think there's one right there, yes.
Hello, my name's Huda Saleh. I'm a business researcher for control risks. I'm an Iraqi, however, I consider myself British. I've integrated and assimilated into British life. However, I was wondering what advice His Excellency would have to someone like me who wants to contribute to Iraq but isn't sure how to do so.
To me?
Ambassador, yes, to you.
We at the embassy in Riyadh, we have a program, outreach to the community, where we bring the community and we talk about issues and what they can do to benefit. So if you move to Riyadh, I'd welcome you in our One thing I encourage you to do is to stay in touch with our embassy here, and I'm sure you can find something to work. There is also in Iraq a very strong civil society, and I encourage you to get in touch with Iraqi societies who are dealing with a lot of important issues, such as related to orphans, widows, handicapped. These are communities which I'm proud to have served in the past. I've worked with those, and like I said, there are a lot of civil society community in Iraq which in need of your talent and your abilities. So I encourage you to get in touch with them and try to help them.
Just right in the front here. This one.
And root for the Iraqi team.
Hi, my name is Michael Muneshi. I'm an academic as well and an Iraq expert. I actually read the report, and there is an academic, there is a historical mistake actually that was in the report, and I wanted to highlight it actually. It said it was in putting Iraq foreign policy in context with the issue of Rashid Ali al-Gailani's, what they call it, the coup. It happened as a result, it says it here, as a result of the king asking Rashid Ali al-Gailani to resign. Actually, it was a mistake, a historical mistake that should be corrected. The king could not have asked Rashid Ali al-Gailani to resign because he was only 6-year-old. And it was actually, the country was led by the Crown Prince, Abdullah. So this is but that's just a point I wanted to. But Eugene, I've read the report actually, and it has got a lot of ambiguity. I mean, with issue, you've asked some people in the foreign ministry in Baghdad, and you said that they wanted the departure of the American troops from Iraq. But I remember around that time there was a conflicting statements coming out, for example, from the Kurdish region or from the Kurdish leadership, and I think the Sunnis as well, some of the Sunnis, who they were really fearful of what might happen if the American leaves, you know. So I was wondering whether have you put in something like this to them in that contest, you know, sort of like, I mean, did you ask any questions regarding to what will be the situation after that?
Well, this report is research and written after the withdrawal of troops. It's something where here at Chatham House we've done other events and reports about scenarios for a post-American Iraq before, when Iraq was still under occupation. I think when we were interviewing politicians today, we were talking more about their attitudes towards current and future events. But I think there are some ambiguities, and I think it's also complicated by the fact that there were probably a great many politicians who saw an advantage to some levels of American troops staying, even if it wasn't a full-scale occupation anymore. But that's not a position that is easily taken in public. So you do often get a bit of a gap there, I think. And thank you for your historical point.
So just right over here on the side, yeah.
Thank you. Joel Khatib from Iraq Energy Institute. I've got a comment on the remark that Phoebe made on the withdrawal syndrome. And I think you're quite right, and it really impacted the policy between the US and Iraq quite negatively. I mean, we all know that foreign policy quite instrumental in shaping up foreign relationship between countries. And but it needs to be very much reciprocal between two countries. And between Iraq and the United States, since 2008 onwards, it was rather vague. That rendered the embassy quite useless in a way that, I mean, I've engaged with every single ambassador from 2008 onwards, also with the staff of the embassy. And I found and I sensed that deficit of knowledge. There is a lack of handover between the various missions. And this has not only affected the United States diplomatic mission in Baghdad, but also the United Nations, I've noticed that. And that happens every 2 years. So we witnessed that over 3 ambassadorship since 2008. And this pushed not only the Iraqi government establishing relationship with lobbyists in the United States to connect with the White House, but also every single politician and independent parties in Baghdad signing up with lobbyist companies to do so. So that's one thing. And the other thing, the comment on the the ambassador on the energy policy, that was vague as well, because we witnessed the revolving door in the State Department's officials, affiliates from, I think, including most of the ambassadors, from Zal to Jim Jeffrey, and how they kind of like, they have a different stance when they were in office, and the day they left, they joined international oil companies. And of course, this kind of like moved in exploring and lobbying for their views, and that influenced also the movement of IOCs from north to south, and eventually backfired on the federal government's relationship with those IOCs moving around. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to agree with you. I was asked to focus on Iraq's relationship with the U.S. If we turn it around and get on U.S. relations with Iraq, as I said, I'm not attached to the government, so these are my thoughts. That would take almost a whole session to talk about that, because there is much to be desired on the U.S. side. I am in full agreement. I'm trying to simply describe what I see. The staffing of the U.S. Embassy, the whole issue of not only U.S. relations with Iraq, but with the Arab world as a whole, training in Arabic, sending people who have a knowledge of the language, an understanding of the area, all of this needs a great deal of work in the United States. And one of the things that disturbs me, I wish I could have an answer to it, is what I see increasingly in the United States, especially since Libya, is the security mania. We have to protect protection of the U.S. People and so on, you know, is the prime purpose. Well, how can you do your diplomacy? How can you engage in it if you don't get out of the embassy? And bureaucracy is a constant problem, even in the United States, in formulating policy or anything else, is lateral relationships and so on. So I do want to say, I not only recognize this, but as I said, and I mean it, the United States needs to do a great deal of work. And in fact, as I talk to people who are involved in Iraq, in the think tanks, in the State Department, in other agencies, and so on, they may have very different views. They may not have as good relations, and it's shrinking. The United States as a whole, in terms of public opinion reflected in Congress, is, you know, it considers much of this a mistake and the way in which it was carried out, and it doesn't want to hear about it. But that doesn't excuse the administration, and my own sense of it is we certainly don't want a huge presence there. I don't think that's desired in Iraq, but we need to beef up, as I would put it, the staff, and we certainly need to do in Iraq what I sort of recommended Iraqis might do in the U.S., and I wish I had a better answer to this security menu, which incidentally is not supported by the diplomats that I talk to. They recognize that they need to get out, and they're extremely unhappy about this. But, you know, as I said, it's a domestic issue and difficult to deal with.
When I said about energy policy, I said managing the energy resources in Iraq is a national interest. And it offers both an opportunity for the Iraqis to bring the Iraqis together around this vital resource. Also, it's a platform for us to engage our neighbors and the international community on such an important issue.
I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. Before I do that, I just wanted to turn to Jane and ask, given the recent developments in Egypt that are afoot, despite my desire to wish we could add an asterisk in a report under the Iraq-Egypt section that said subject to change, I wanted to ask you about the role of political Islam in the region. You have in Egypt, and perhaps some may take issue with the comparison, but in Egypt you have the Muslim Brotherhood, who've now just been deposed, identifying as an Islamic party who've engaged in democracy. And in Iraq you have the Islamic Da'wah Party, currently headed by the Prime Minister, who espouses Islamic Shia principles. Could you perhaps comment on the comparison between the two, the role of political Islam in the region today, and given recent developments in Egypt?
One of the things I found interesting when speaking to people from the Dawa party was this expression of pride that, in their view, we were the first Islamic party in the region or in the world to adopt the language of democracy and say that there wasn't a contradiction. Of course, there are many that claim that, and followers of Rashid Ghannouchi would claim that he was one of the kind of leading thinkers on that. The Muslim Brotherhood, too, have been at the forefront of trying to look at political Islam through the ballot box. I think one of the worries now is the credibility of that experiment over, and where do they go next if they think that the ballot box isn't an option? I think also both of those parties have been facing issues that aren't specific to political Islam, but that are very similar to what was discussed at the time of the French and American revolutions about how do you prevent democracy in its early stages becoming the tyranny of the majority. And you've seen both Maliki and Morsi being extremely frustrated with opposition that they see as anti-democratic and expressing the view that they have the legitimacy of the ballot box and they are the majority, to which the opposition counters democracy is about more than majoritarianism, especially in these nascent stages, and it also needs to be about checks and balances and rights that aren't being provided. One last comparison that I would draw would be that these are also movements that have been shaped by spending most of their existence in opposition. They have a very high propensity to be insecure and to see conspiracies against them. And I think you could criticize both for looking at domestic opposition and spending too much time focusing on these being kind of foreign-backed counter-revolutionaries and not enough on addressing their the real sort of local grievances that drive them. Finally, I noticed that Bashar Assad used the overthrow of Morsi to declare political Islam dead, but it seems that doesn't apply to Iran or Hezbollah.
Two more questions. I'll take one up front here, and one at the back, and one more here, actually, in the middle, so three. So we'll start up here. Sorry, there's one.
Hi, my name is Suns Abbas. I'm Iraqi Turkmen representative to AK. The question is, the current situation of Iraq is based on the powerful groups, some powerful group, and all the internal policies based on these interests of these powerful group. The weakest group, like Turkmens, that will be vulnerable to be attacked by the terrorist group. The question is, to what extent we are expecting to see foreign policy for Iraq while we don't have really internal policy based on our citizenship interests rather than to these powerful groups' interests. Thank you.
We'll put them together. There's two more. I'll take one at the back there. Thanks, Christina. And one here at Ali Reza, just to your left there, this one.
Hi, I'm Munif Kalawoon of St. Olaf School. And Ms. Kinnin mentioned that it would be in Iraq's interest to strengthen its links with East Asia, particularly China, because of its apparent neutral position in the Middle East. However, recently China vetoed action against the Syrian regime multiple times in the UN. So how do you think that this will affect Iraq's future relations with China? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ali Reza Ahmadian. I actually worked as a researcher for a recent BBC documentary titled Ahmadinejad, the Populist and the Pariah. We interviewed Ambassador Ryan Crocker, former US ambassador in Iraq. He clearly stated that Iran's foreign policy in Iraq is set by General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Quds Force. I was wondering if the members of the panel would comment who actually sets Iran's policies in Iraq. Thank you.
Three strong questions. I think we will start with perhaps the last one, and I was going to ask Gareth if you would be willing to take that one on, Qasem Soleimani and Iran and Iraq.
and I'm willing to try and dodge it. But, I think it's entirely understandable why figures such as Ryan Crocker and David Petraeus would point to Qasem Soleimani being the agent of all of Iranian activity in Iraq, because he made their lives very, very difficult indeed, and to a degree mocked them as he was doing it as well. I mean, the man, he was unbelievable in how he was engaging with the US in Iraq at the time of Crocker and Petraeus. So he's almost there as almost like a bogeyman figure. I mean, he's this omnipresent, all-powerful figure spanning Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, with the Al-Quds. And even though Al-Quds is set up in an asymmetric sort of way, and its capabilities are not terribly well known, but probably nowhere near as great as people suspect them to be, he has that position of being seen as this supreme, dark, from the American perspective, dark figure. So I'm not surprised at all that he's pointed to, especially as he is a relatively publicly known figure in a system that itself is tremendously opaque. So you can point to him. Now, who is making Iranian foreign policy towards Iraq? I don't really know, although I'm not prepared to say that Iranian foreign policy is haphazard and reactive. I think, however it's constructed, and we can talk to people who know Iran better than I do, I think it is very well thought through, very well considered, and there is a plan that is followed quite carefully, and Qasem Soleimani and Al-Quds is clearly part of that, a very big part of that, but I guess that there are other players and actors as well.
Jane, China?
In China, I think the vetoes in the Security Council are very problematic, and I don't want what I say to sound like an endorsement, but I think it's important to understand that China's veto of intervention isn't a case of siding with Iran against Saudi Arabia. It's a continuity of a much broader, longer-term principle of Chinese foreign policy, which is to distrust humanitarian interventions, which is also something that Russia has historically distrusted. They moved a bit over Libya. They felt that they were betrayed. So this is something that is consistent. They showed the same approach actually over Sudan, when at that time most of the Arab leaders were siding with a leader who was butchering many of his own people. I think there is some comparison between China's attitude on Syria and Iraq's. They would like to see a peaceful resolution, even though there's not actually any signs of any process leading that way at all, and they don't seem to be doing very much to push it forward. But they know that it's a problem, and they know that the way that they're perceived by the Gulf countries over Syria is really souring the honeymoon that they've had in the region over the past 10 years.
And the last question I will give to, and perhaps some final remarks from Phoebe and Ambassador Jumaili as well, about the first question was about how we can discuss foreign policy when some of the internal policies inside Iraq, particularly concerning minorities, are so contested and perhaps some would argue non-existent. Would you like to start with your comments?
How can we discuss foreign policy when, especially with respect to minorities, it's so contested? Well, I think with respect to foreign policy, especially what I see occurring in Washington, ultimately Iraqis will get together. I agree that there has been traditionally, and still is, I think, expressed very strong Iraqi identity. But the politics now is so contested, especially with minorities. And I agree that Iraq's great strength is its diversity. And it pains me a great deal to say that I think Iraq is losing it. I mean, its instability, what it's been through, has removed, for example, a very old, of course, that's not recent, a very old Jewish community, which used to be very well integrated. Now, the Christian communities are, you know, there's a lot of loss, but it's not, that's not all gone. So Iraq needs to help settle its contested aspect, and when it does, there'll be a greater foreign policy. The one place that I'm written on Iraqi history, and I keep asking myself whether I'm going to, still have an Iraqi history as it used to stand, certainly not as it used to stand to write again. The one issue is the Kurds, or, the KRG and where that is going. I look at ground truth. And it's not just since 2003, but since especially 1990, 91. Identity, institutionalization, all sorts of things have taken place in the north, which make Kurdish identification, as I see it and hear it, when I go there, with Iraq and Baghdad, much, much more difficult. And whatever the relationship is going to be, it will be very different, I think, than it used to be in the past. Although I think Kurdish appetites can also be much greater than their capacity and their reality. They're still dependent on the central government for their income up to this point, and they really can't protect their own territory entirely. As we can see from Turkey, they may end up being more of a protectorate of Turkey than anything else. So in time, we will see how far that goes, but that is going to be a little more of a problem.
I think it will be a vital mistake for us Iraqis if we take our national integrity for granted. This is something we have to nurture. This is something we have to work for. And it's something, it's important for us to make the case for every Iraqi, regardless of their background, regardless of their ethnicity, okay? That it's in their best interest to be part of this thing that we call Iraq. And things should not be done in Syria. We can do a lot of things at the same time, because the Iraqi people have high expectations upon us. So hopefully we can be in a position to better serve our people.
With that, I have to draw it to a close. My apologies. I'm sorry. We have to end it there. But if you just give me 1 minute more of your time to first and foremost say thank you to our panelists, especially Dr. Phoebe Marr, who's come all the way from Washington to join us here, and Ambassador Ghanem Al-Jumaili from Riyadh, who's come in to join us as well. I would say to you all to stay tuned for future work on Iraq. We're hoping to grow this project into a second phase that is looking at a regional aspect that counts for Iraq, Syria, the Gulf states, and the politics of sectarianism across the region. So read up. We will try and correct the error that you pointed out to us. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for joining us all this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.